Hello everybody, this is Fun Police, and I am back with what is going to be the first deck tech after the World at War expansion came out. This one is going to be of a deck that I had theory crafted pretty much since the reveal of the main card in it, but that is a revival of German discard. Now, this one is a throwback to a very old deck list. Way back, I believe in 2019 or even 2018, there was a German-Japan discard deck, and it was arguably one of the top meta decks, largely thanks to its efficient discard and the fact that many control decks often were very vulnerable to it, and overall they were able to last. It fell off after a handful of nerfs to key cards like WOLFPACK and the 357 or 375, my apologies, in terms of the discard. But now we've had a lot of tools added to the not only the discard package but also more control options. But the one thing that's gotten me to revisit this is Eagle Day. Eagle Day is a new card from the Battle of Britain set that is 5 credits, and it puts a German air unit into play with Blitz. You choose it from your hand, and then at the end of the turn, it returns to your hand. So you can essentially turn any German air unit into a comet for one turn. Now, on its own, that doesn't seem particularly good. If we look at German planes, a lot of them are either really small or mostly have deployment effects, which Eagle Day doesn't work with. However, there is actually a collection of special rarity German planes that work very well with Eagle Day. And those are the Ju-88 G6 and the Do-217. Both of these have effects that trigger when they kill a unit, which is actually very beneficial because both of these are normally quite slow. But with Eagle Day, you're able to get them out there and immediately attack with them. And due to the fact that you have complete control, you're only going to do this when you can trigger that effect. Then they will safely return back to your hand, which gives you an excellent extra threat while triggering their ability. For the Ju-88, that means that you kill an enemy unit and then you get that unit added to your hand, and the Ju-88 returns either for more uses with more Eagle Days or just to play out at a later time. Similar thing with the Do-217, although this card also makes the enemy discard, which can feed into our discard-based game plan. And if used correctly, the 3 Eagle Days could be seen as 3 more discard orders to work with the Do-217s. We do also have a couple more units out. The JAGDBOMBER, and the 262 both exist as tools in order to pressure the enemy and overall, make sure that Eagle Day always has at least some use. The JAGDBOMBER is more of an emergency card. We're playing that mostly because it is quite good on its own. But the 262 can also serve as, I'm just going to kill the enemy with Eagle Days, as you just have a Mega Comet that has more utility. But let's quickly just dive over all the cards and look at them, and I'll just quickly explain their role within the deck. So first off, we have Through the Breach. This is a very basic card. Through the Breach is just a 1-credit tactical strike, essentially, a small version of it, and it's proven to be decently useful. It's effective at helping to ping off low health enemy units, which can be very useful when trying to trade into them or pairing it up with other removal. And coming down in turn 1 can also mean it can quickly snipe important units, and it also just retains its usefulness even late game, as again, you're able to possibly finish off that, say, 1 or 2 health enemy unit that would otherwise be causing you massive headaches. Next up, we have the 33rd RECON. 33rd RECON has been always one of these Japanese units that is always just pretty good to put in a deck. It is 1 credit, 1/2 infantry, and when it takes damage, you draw a card. There are very few things that will stop the Recon from drawing a card, and a 1 credit 1/2 draw a card, honestly quite good. overall a decent little card. Next up, you have the U16. This is the first of our discard synergy. This one is very basic. You pay 1 credit, and then the enemy at the start of their turn has to choose and discard a card from their hand. This is essentially just a very cheap way to make the enemy discard. Also, however, it does have the added benefit of if the enemy has 0 cards in hand and you play the U16, when they draw their first card for the turn, they will then have to immediately discard it. Meaning that you can essentially use this to block certain draws from the enemy later on in the game, which gives it that benefit over something like the U375, which only just discards a card of 5 or less from the enemy hand. There are some benefits to the U375, namely it being arguably a little bit quicker, and it has a better chance of hitting maybe something the enemy doesn't want. But the U16 is still just, I think, a little more useful in this deck because of its better late game potential, which is what this deck is really looking to do, is looking to get to that late game position where the enemy has few cards in hand and then they die to whatever we have left. Next up, we have the HEINKEL HE 115. Very basic, good card. Even though it's been nerfed, it's still just a great draw engine. You pay 3 credits to deal 1 damage to something, and then you have a Spoils of War added to your hand, which is some filtered draw. It's overall just a very nice little unit. Nothing game-winning, but just a nice tool to have, especially early on. Then we get the FLAMMPANZERs. Pretty much a bog standard for any German control deck, because you just get a decently sized tank and it's able to blow up cheap aggro units. Even control decks often have a couple 1-cost units out, and you're able to blow those up with the FLAMMPANZER also, but it's mainly there as an anti-aggro tool, and it does a very good job at it. In the same parallel, we have the Tactical Strike. This is the alternate art one, just so people aren't confused. The premium bundle offers the premium bundle for Battle of Britain offered a alt art for Tactical Strike, Carpet Bombing, and the Hurricane. So if you see weird art, that's why. But Tactical Strike serves a very useful purpose. It pairs very well with the previously talked about Through the Breaches, and on its own, it's just quite good at the moment. Notably, it has a lot of benefit against the rising US aggro decks, because it's able to deal with things like Skytrain and Catalina, and pretty much answers any threat they throw out, which is extremely useful. On top of just being generally beneficial, the removal package seen within this deck is actually quite synergistic with each other, all able to often be pulled together and used in tandem in order to finish off threats that they otherwise couldn't deal with on their own, while still being good enough and being general enough that they will work on more targets to where you don't have to combo them. But it gives you a lot of flexibility depending on the board situation to use it. Tactical Strike feeds into that. 4 damage is enough to kill a fair amount of units or leave them on such low health that something like Through the Breach or even something like the HE115 could get the finishing blow on it. Then we move on to REICH RESEARCH. This one is, again, just kind of a staple German control card. The V1 Flying Bomb is highly effective, being able to act as essentially like a massive sudden strike, being a 3-credit kill an enemy unit that costs 3 or less. Very effective, very useful as anti-aggro, but then you also get the ability to, you could do Synthetic Oil, which is you gain 10 additional credits next turn. That one's a little less useful, mainly because it is sometimes difficult to do much with that. Although I could see situations where it's useful. But really, the main one is the Type 25 U-Boat, which is the 3rd tier from Advanced, the Advanced REICH RESEARCH. Or it's 21, Type 21, my apologies. But that one is, it kills an enemy unit and the enemy discards 2 cards. Quite obvious as to why it should feed into this discard-based game plan. And then you also have your RAN project, which I should point out is a useful thing to keep in mind. 12 credits to just blow up all enemy units has its uses, and in certain matchups it can be game winning, because it's one of the few ways that you could potentially just save yourself from the enemy. That is other in terms of you could save yourself from a board that otherwise you couldn't recover from. Having that effect potentially on hand after you've Leopold and various other big board removals is potentially going to save you a couple of times. But the main one is the Type 21 U-boat. That one is overall the most effective. Then we move on to the 61st Infantry Regiment. This is our first guard unit, and one of the few guard units we have, but it offers an excellent guard of 4/4 stats, which is average, but it has destruction draw a card, so it cycles itself when it dies. This makes it a very effective guard overall, and is just kind of here to help give us a defensive end. This deck is notably lacking in healing, so we need to make sure to have at least a small contingent of good guards in order to protect us and keep us safe. Then we move on to Root Out. This got buffed recently, so previously it gave -2/-2 until your next turn, but now it permanently gives -2/-1. And this has made Root Out even better as a control card, because you're permanently shrinking the enemies, you're permanently weakening them. It's been very good at softening the enemy up for something like Tactical Strike to finish them off, or even just shrinking an aggro deck's board to be much less of a threat. I've had games won where the enemy has a bunch of like 1/3s, and I make them all 0/1s, and then the enemy just can't do anything with them, and they either just take up their dead weight to them, or they have to spend credits to get rid of them, or they have to wait until they can buff them again, and even then that's only returning them to probably their original state. It's overall just been very good. Root Out has just been one of the great German cards. It's a good mid-game board clear. Overall very effective. Same thing with the Panzer III-H, another very effective German card. It's a modest tank body, but it has Spoils of War stapled on top of it. That is just a very solid effect, and the III-H helps you to filter your deck and find the right cards you need right at that moment. Sometimes you need more anti-aggro stuff, sometimes you might need a guard, sometimes you're looking to dig for, say, Eagle Days to start combining later on. The III-H helps a ton in this regard. Then we have the Takasaki Regiment. This card a long time ago got nerfed from a 3/6 to a 2/6 and really disappeared for a while, but that was because discarded also largely disappeared, and because it didn't have much synergy, because previously it was ran just because the body was so good, and then it also dragged down a card out of the enemy's hand. Now it has to kind of be combined with other discard, but it's still quite good in this discard deck. 2/6 is not the strongest stat line, but it's enough to block a few attacks, and then the enemy losing a card means that they can't trade effectively into this, and it always compounds on top of our other discards, and the enemy can have a really annoying time where they really don't want to hit the Takasaki, and it can even stall out more because the enemy doesn't want to trigger that destruction and maybe lose that core win con card of theirs. Then we move on to Eagle Day. I've already talked about this previously. We're going to be using this to combo with some of our later German fighters in order to have a flexible kind of toolkit. Whether we need value, more discard, or even just to kill the enemy. It's been a fun card so far. The JU-88, as talked about, is mainly here to combine with Eagle Day and can provide you with more value. If you're looking to win a value matchup, the JU-88 is the main one you want to pull out with Eagle Day, because if you're trying to go with a if the enemy has a lot of draw, which is normally the counter to discard, the JU-88 alongside Eagle Day can help you to potentially grind the enemy out really well. If they play something like a B-17 or like the new ISU-152 or something like the Churchill AVRE, you can soften them down with tactical strikes and through the breaches and other trades, and then use the Eagle Day JU-88 combo to steal it, adding a massive threat to your hand while also having the JU-88 return to your hand for future use. It's been an effective tool and helps a lot if you can use it correctly. Then we have the Focke-Wulf 190 JAGDBOMBER. This is mostly here because it is just a really good elite. You know, you're just going to be able to pay 5 credits, bounce an enemy ground unit, and have a decent body fighter in return. Not really much else to say. If you're in an emergency situation, the Eagle Day can be combined with the Focke-Wulf to deal 5 damage to something. That has been used. I have used that a couple times to save myself, but it should be in a desperate play. Like, you're going to die if you don't do this, because you don't get the deployment effect. So just be mindful of that. Then we have the WOLFPACK. This is one of still the foundational German discard orders. You deny the enemy essentially 2 cards, shrinking their hand by 2, and that is just very effective at slowly shrinking that enemy hand to the point that they're unable to fight back. There's not much else to say. It's just one of those really strong German discard cards, probably the most foundational one. The DO-217 I talked about at length previously. Its main thing here is to be used with Eagle Day to serve as 3 additional discard orders in the deck. It also has the benefit of essentially acting like removal with that discard, because you're able to deal the 5 damage, which in turn allows you to remove enemy units, you know, and keep the board under control while also feeding into the discard game plan. Late game, you can also just run out the DO-217 as a late game threat. I've definitely won games by using the DO-217 to discard the enemy hand with Eagle Day and then just playing it out and smacking them to death with it. You know, you don't want to play this out naturally unless the enemy's low on cards, but when you do, you know, it helps to serve as extra threat and mileage in the deck. Then we get to kind of the last set of cards, which are kind of our win cons. After we've stripped the enemy's hand of cards, these cards are going to come in and help us finish the game or cement a lead so far that the enemy can't recover. The Tiger 1E is the first one. This is the most powerful, or one of the most powerful cards, and is the most, probably one of the most common win cons within discard. It's very hard to deal with when you don't have many units or orders in hand. Not that orders would really do much, but if the enemy has few cards left, the Tiger 1E is an unstoppable force, trading incredibly well with everything. It also is just very, very durable and overall very, very strong. Then you have the newly changed PANZERZUG 61 BP42. The Zug was changed in the latest balance patch to have a deployment effect where it deploys 2 3/2 tanks essentially with Blitz. The 9 credits is a bit awkward because you're not able to use both Panzer Grenadiers to attack the support line, which is a bit of a pain, but the simple fact that it adds so much stat-wise to the enemy is actually a big effect, and it really helps to damage the enemy or really just put a lot of pressure on the enemy. If the enemy doesn't have a lot of cards in hand, then having 3 bodies, including 1 absolutely massive 5/9 heavy armor 1 tank, is not something they want to see, and that's where the PANZERZUG comes in. The ME-262, as talked about, I talked a little bit about before, if we are in a position where the enemy is not going to let us win through value, the 262 allows us to essentially kill them. By paying 5 credits for Eagle Day and then attacking for 3 more, we get about 8 credits to deal 7 damage to the enemy HQ. If we do that 3 times, the SCHWALBE does kill people unless they've healed, which does actually have a big benefit, as that does allow us to give some extra flexibility to Eagle Day, you know, in case we can't discard the enemy and we know we're not going to be able to outvalue them. Being able to pressure them through life loss just gives Eagle Day an extra utility in that regard. The 262 also just has the benefit of being very good against decks that have a lot of air units. And that's actually quite common. Between stuff like Brit Air, the resurgence of Ramp, and a few other decks, it's not uncommon to the SCHWALBE to come down and essentially be a massive board clear. Overall, it's just a very effective tool. Then we have Empire of the Sun. And Empire of the Sun is not a card we've seen a whole lot in recent times, as again, Japan has not really needed this. However, this card is still a monster at winning the late game. not only being able to kill a single enemy unit, but you're also able to draw usually 4 to 5 cards off of its attack, essentially refilling your hand and gassing you up to a point that you'll probably be able to just deal with whatever the enemy is doing. It is quite slow, so you do need to make sure that the enemy is not able to capitalize on that tempo and possibly kill you. But if you can successfully pull off an Eagle of the Sun, it gives you the ability to often keep pace with even the strongest of decks, like Ramp or Soviet Value, that might have a very large hand size or have a lot of threats in them. And then finally, the Leopold. What do I really need to say about the Leopold? It's a very strong tool. It's a board clear on top of a large artillery piece. It's one of the signature cards of German control. It can win games on its own sometimes, but also will just be the one card that can possibly save your ass in the long term or in emergencies. Overall, very good. And that's the deck. Generally, when I'm on the Mulligan, I'm looking for usually Through the Breaches, 33rd Recons, the HE115, and then any of my 3-cost cards. If I know it is specifically a slow deck, then stuff like 61st Infantry and the Panzer III-H are good keeps. If I know it's an especially slow deck, I'm talking like you know for certain that this deck essentially doesn't play a card until turn 5. You could start keeping stuff like Eagle Days and WOLFPACks in the DO217. But you really got to be careful with that. I would recommend not doing it unless you're absolutely certain 1000% that it is a deck that won't punish you for keeping such a greedy hand. I would generally look to just get stuff that's 4 credits or less. The game plan overall is hopefully quite simple. You're going to control the board with your vast amounts of removal, draw cards to keep the engine flowing, and then tear the enemy hand a new one with stuff like the U-16, Takasaki, WOLFPACK, and then later on Eagle Day and the DO217. Late game, you're looking to generally just finish the enemy off with your large amount of late game power units. And otherwise, that's pretty much it. One last thing is that I want to talk about a few cards that didn't make the cut. First one being the Panther A. The Panther A is normally something that I think people try out in a discard deck, but the requirement of getting it into the front line I think is just too difficult and makes the Panther A lackluster in this deck. We often don't have frontline control anyway, so being able to play this down as a relatively slow 5-drop and then moving it into the front line is not that common. And if it dies, it doesn't do anything, and it essentially just doesn't add a whole lot to the deck. If you're looking for budget cards, I would recommend stuff like the Panzer IV-F2. That could be a decent late-game threat. Or in general, stuff like even the Tiger 1H could fill in for like the 1E and the PANZERZUG if you don't have them. Just anything generally quite big. I would not recommend running the Stuka either. The Stuka is just overall too expensive, and because it has to go face, you're essentially paying upwards of 7 credits to deal 3 damage to the enemy HQ and draw a card, or make them discard. That's not effective enough. It's not a good enough tool compared to the DO217, which is dealing 5 to an enemy unit and guaranteeing the kill on them, and then making the enemy discard. You could also look to run the Junkers JU-188. This is potentially quite powerful as a finisher. Combined with Eagle Day, this is 10 damage to the enemy HQ from hand. And that's potentially going to just kill the enemy. But the Junkers struggles to have any use outside of that. But, you know, if you want to try out one copy, it is quite fun. Otherwise, on the Japanese side, there are a few guards that you could also try out. If you feel like you have enough draw and wanted to swap out the 61st, I could recommend the Osaka Regiment. The extra stat line on it makes it a lot tougher to deal with, and it's a better threat on its own. Just be careful of retreats. If you're raising a deck with retreats or a lot of retreats heavy stuff, the Osaka is a bigger punishment. I would look to the Type 3 Chi Nu also maybe. It is better at pressuring the enemy because it is a tank. It is a little more expensive, but the ambush also means it is very annoying for certain aggro decks to deal with. If we look at the healing that Japan has, they really only have about 2 options: Long Range Recon and Ancient Empire, and both don't work in this deck. Long Range Recon is obviously like a non-combo base piece because this requires the enemy to have a larger hand and better tools. Meanwhile, we're looking to actively rip the enemy hand apart, meaning we'll often pay 4 credits for like 2 to 3 points of health. Ancient Empire could be justified a little bit, but I think the healing is too small in order to make useful. If it was maybe like 6 health or even 7 health, I would honestly consider it, because we could make use of the buff a little bit, and the larger amount of healing I think would make Ancient Empire easier to justify and give the deck a little bit of healing, as that is probably the main weakness of this deck. If you're running into a lot of stuff that is burn heavy, stay away from this deck because it just doesn't have the tools to deal with that. Otherwise, that's sadly going to be it for today. I am currently in a very busy time in my real life, and I don't have time to record extra games and all that. So these are going to be quicker videos, and I apologize for that. Hopefully I explained what it was, but sadly that's what's going to happen for the deck techs for cards in the next probably 2 months. But thankfully that also means I can probably start doing, these videos a little more frequently, instead of trying to find good games that, work well for a video and show off the strengths and weaknesses of a deck. And overall, hopefully, I hope you guys understand. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people enjoy the silent gameplay. And maybe I can do like a video that is just long play. Let me know in the comments below if you just like literally like an hour-long gameplay session of me just recording games silently and posting it, and we can just show off a bunch of different decks. Maybe I could do that one night and upload that. But otherwise, I want to thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. It helps me out a whole lot. Definitely more deck techs on the way. Also, Inscription is still in process. Sadly, I had a bit of a hiccup and some of the video footage got corrupted, and I'm pretty much having to restart the whole part 3, which sucks. So that's gotten delayed by a week or 2. So maybe sometime in December that'll go up. Otherwise, I just want you all to have a good day and see you later.